But let's start out with Chauncey DeVega. Chauncey is the political essayist and commentator, contributor with Salon. He's got a new piece up on Salon, in fact, about Nazism and Trumpism. He's also the host of the Chauncey DeVega Show podcast. His website, Chauncey DeVega, DEVGA.com, and you can tweet him at Chauncey DeVega. Chauncey, welcome back to the program.
Always a pleasure to have you. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you with us. I wanted to start with this piece that you wrote, Are White People Ready to Bail on Democracy? These researchers say the danger is real. Can you set that up for us, please?
Well, we know, looking at American history, that racism is a dagger of sorts at the heart of American democracy.
Want to connect with the show online?
From Trump's hate rallies to his overt racist and nativist speech, we're actually starting to get a lot of good empirical data. And one of the things we're learning, again, from political scientists, sociologists, and others, is that Trump voters and white Americans who are racially resentful in general are much more likely to believe that we should cancel elections, that we should suppress that we should restrict the free press, that if Donald Trump basically ordered a rollback of democracy, that they would go along with it. And why is that? Because of social dominance behavior and anxiety about America's changing demographics. So unfortunately, we have too many white Americans who are willing to make a bargain, basically saying, you know what, it's a zero-sum game. And if we can't run the show to American democracy, then it can be damned.
Yeah, and so what do we do with that? I mean, actually, let me Kamala Harris over the weekend talked about I'm not afraid of identity politics. James Baldwin was asked about this. I don't know the year, but probably back in the 60s.
Because in America has only been a democracy on paper for 50 years, and that's since the end of the civil rights movement, at least formally in terms of the popular imagination. So in terms of thinking about history, history can move forward, but in terms of American democracy, it's been a very, very slow march, and we can lose the little democracy that we have very quickly. So the easy answer would be, in a perfect world, we fix our educational system. We make sure that we have a true we the people democracy. We work to create multiracial, cross-class alliances at every level of American life. But if someone were to give me the big bucks and say, hey, Chauncey, man, what would you tell the Democrats to do in terms of strategy? What would you tell liberals and progressives? I'd say stop wasting your time trying to win over Trump voters. We have a ton of data, again, that's showing us that these folks are authoritarian, that they are resistant to cosmopolitanism. They want to live in the past and not the present. And, I've spoken to some of the leading experts on Trumpism. I go out and instead of, working with conjecture like so many of the talking heads do, I want to try to figure out what we know empirically. And what I'm seeing over the years of studying Trump and Trumpism and working on my own book is that Trump voters cannot be reached. We need to work on those Americans who are on the fence and those other Americans who simply didn't vote. Yeah. These Trump cultists are a lost cause, and we need to stop worrying about them.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. Yesterday, there's a documentary. It's called Documenting Hate, Charlottesville. It's going to premiere on PBS on the 7th, which is tomorrow, and on your local public broadcasting TV station. And in that documentary, they're making the case that the Charlottesville, there's about 500 of these right-wing white supremacist protesters in Charlottesville, and that group kind of split into three. And one of those three groups is out still protesting out in public. We saw this in Portland this weekend. Another part of that group, and I don't know the percentages here, but another part of that group has gone into more of kind of a Koch brothers mode, for lack of a better way to describe it. Recruiting on college campuses, trying to get inside political parties. Becoming political or Republican campaign chairman, or within the Republican Party anyway. And a third group has split off and said, we're going to start killing people, and we're going to do it quietly, essentially. And we're not trying to be the Weather Underground. We're not, trying to be famous. We're just going to start killing people. And yesterday, at 3 o'clock in the morning yesterday in Madison, Wisconsin, the progressive radio station there, WRT, somebody walked in and shot a guy. And, he's still alive, but he was shot. What does all this, how does all this inform you? And how would you tie this back to your current piece in Salon about how the Nazis dealt with this and how we should be dealing with it?
So the first thing we need to understand is when Trump calls the news media, journalists and reporters, enemies of the people, well, that's Stalinist rhetoric that, again, is part of a trend we've seen over the decades with right-wing Republicans and others using eliminationist rhetoric against Democrats, liberals, non-whites, immigrants, and others. So we need to, again, check that box off. And thinking about my piece today, again, saying, you know what, it's both reasonable and appropriate to compare Donald Trump and Trumpism to Hitler and Nazism. You don't want to wait until it's too late. Because once it's too late, there's nothing that can be done. We have all these folks wringing their hands saying, well, is Trump like Hitler? Oh, is that a fair historical analogy? The man is certainly a fascist. He's certainly a racial authoritarian. We have a ton of data about that. And he certainly is, again, holding a dagger at the heart of American democracy. And with Trump and his voters and his supporters, if you look at these hate rallies, does any reasonable person have any doubt in their mind that if Trump again said go out and start killing people, go out and start attacking journalists, which he has basically said, that they wouldn't do it? And again, thinking about this moment and this enemy of people moment, and I mean, that's really important research, thinking about how these right-wing hate groups have splintered. We need to, again, stop wringing our hands. Again, the mainstream corporate news media types. The New York Times today had a piece basically trying to whitewash the Republican Party's association with Nazism. There's a reason that David Duke and other neo-Nazis, Richard Spencer and white supremacists are attracted to the Republican Party. Because they agree with them. And the Republicans, for the most part, going back to the Southern strategy, agree with them as well. They're just upset about the style and the presentation. And that goes all the way up to Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. Where do you see this going, Chauncey? And what's your biggest concern?
Well, I don't think this ends well. As I said, I've spoken to many historians and others about this moment. To some, this will sound dramatic, but I don't see this ending without some sort of civil unrest, quite frankly. And the question then becomes, what is the scale? We've already seen killings and murders. We saw that in Charlottesville. We saw that in Portland. And another important issue we have to talk about with the far right, who are increasingly the center of the Republican Party, because the Republican Party is embracing these people's strategies, they're embracing their policies. Again, there's a huge overlap in the Venn diagram, is we need to have an honest conversation about how America's police are infiltrated and allying with these white supremacists and neo-Nazis. Across the country, there's been some great research on this. We saw this over the weekend. Who do the police protect? The gun-toting right-wing thugs.
Yeah.
Because why? Because they see them as being more representative of the mainstream. And that's, again, not me, playing with a riff here, right? Sort of just working with conjecture and rhetoric. We've had research where they basically interviewed the police and looked at internal documents, and the police said, yeah, we side with the neo-Nazis and these violent right-wingers because, quote-unquote, they're more American than the folks who are protesting them.
Well, we heard from some of the folks who were involved in the protests in Portland over the weekend that I can't make this as an absolute assertion. This is, more in the category of somebody told me, but that the police and the right wingers here in Portland had actually communicated and had a kind of a pact. Don't worry, everything's going to be good. And thus, the guy who got shot in the head, he had a helmet on with a tear gas canister, was one of the left-wing protesters, as opposed to one of the right-wing guys. And this kind of stuff going on. This is what you're saying is happening all over the country?
Oh, yes, and it's remarkably underreported. I mean, I think there's another thing that's going to come out once social demographers start looking at the data. I think we have seen a remarkable rise in interpersonal violence related to Trump's campaign and presidency. And I think also it's going to come out, again, underreported because there's always a lag, that once we get the data from the FBI and local police, who, again, thinking about how police report data, some of that data is remarkably unreliable, and they try to sit on it, just like they do with violence where police are killing innocent people in the street. I think you're going to see a lot of murders and assaults by Trumpsters and their allies, these neo-Nazis and white supremacists, against black and brown folks, immigrants, and others. And we've already seen the murders. And going back to your point about the police in Portland, another huge underreported story, they're going to have another anniversary of the Charlottesville white supremacist hate festival, that horrible riot that killed Heather Heyer in D.C., and they were actually going to have separate trains for Kluxers, white supremacists, and neo-Nazis. Those are our tax dollars. And thank God the brothers and sisters in the local transit union in D.C. dropped a dime on this. They want to use state and public money to protect these fascists.
Well, the first piece I read on that was not that they were trying to do it to protect them, but rather to segregate them so that there wouldn't be violence in the metro system in Washington, D.C.
Well, I think the practical function of that is basically that we're spending public monies to protect these folks, right? And I mean, it's a double insult in a lot of ways, because who's instigating the violence? Who has the guns? We saw that in Portland. It's these white supremacists and neo-Nazis. They're the ones who are escalating the violence, and to have black and brown folks, the majority of whom work in the transit system down there in D.C., to have to sit there and escort and use public money to protect these bigots, it's abominable. But again, it's part of a pattern where this hate is being normalized. Yeah, and we're also seeing things like, the murder of Neil Wilson, for example, underreported, it's spurred some protests and whatnot, but it's not the kind of national story you would expect. At the same time that, for example, the gun violence in Chicago, where you live,
has been heavily reported. I think it's the right wing's favorite, chant, I guess. Thoughts on those?
Well, I mean, that's just part of a pattern, right? So look at black and brown folks and say, look at Chicago, and use all sorts of racial slurs. Go to Stormfront, go to Fox News comment sections. But then when you flip the script and say, okay, we have a problem across the country with gun violence, and never mind where these guns are coming from, Indiana, let's talk about the violence in this country, in mass shootings, again, disproportionately committed by white men, especially right-wing Trump supporters. I mean, those are huge underreported stories where you look at the horrible massacres at these schools the last few. A lot of these men had connections, these young teens and boys. They were advocates of Donald Trump. They were his supporters. So, I mean, that's just a lazy deflection to hide the fact that a lot of these Trump voters, again, thinking back to the Republican Party, where conservatism and racism is now one and the same thing, that they don't want to speak the truth about the real social dynamics of this country.
Yeah, and the conservatives who don't want to buy into this are left just basically being corporatists. Just going to play this James Baldwin clip for Chauncey, but it's just as good to play it for you, so you can check this out. This is James Baldwin speaking on the issue of race in the United States. Now, keep in mind, this was, probably after the Civil Rights Act, but in that neighborhood of time. I'm not exactly sure when this was. It could have even been in the 70s. But it's just such a brilliant articulation. I wanted to share it with you.
So why must we always concentrate on color or religion or this? There are other ways of connecting men. So why must
once you turn your back on this society, you may die. I don't know what most white people in this country feel, but I can only include what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby is anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks I give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.